Before dawn on June 16, 1942, a hard gale ran white across the Atlantic east of Cape Cod. In convoy formation, 8 merchantmen pushed through steep, slate-colored seas under the guard of British and Canadian escorts. In the middle ranks, the British refrigerated freighter SS Port Nicholson took the weather on her starboard bow, spray slamming across the bridge windows and freezing in the wind. Down in the engine room, steam turbines kept their steady beat as men wiped oil from valves and listened for a change in the note that would mean trouble. On deck, lines creaked, a hatchdog rattled against its seat, and a lookout braced in the dark, blinking salt from his eyes. At 4:17 a.m., just as he drew breath to call the next bearing, a German torpedo hit the ship. The first shock lifted everything that wasn't tied down, and the lights flickered. A minute later, a second torpedo struck farther aft. Somewhere below, steel shrieked as bulkheads took the strain. Water came fast. The freighter began to settle by the stern. The submarine was U-87 under Captain Lieutenant Joachim Berger, stalking convoy XB-25 as it closed on Massachusetts Bay. In the gale, there was no clean outline of ships, only masts and smoke and the heave of hulls. But Berger had put his spread into the shape of the convoy and found his mark. The Port Nicholson's master, Harold Charles Jeffrey, ordered the boats cleared and the engines stopped. On the boat deck, men hauled at falls while others ran for lifebelts. 2 engine room crew were killed in the first minutes. The rest fought the list to reach ladders that tilted away from them. In the murk, another freighter, the American passenger cargo ship Cherokee, took her own fatal blows and went down with heavy loss of life, proof to everyone left above water that the attack was no near miss. Abandoning ship in a sea like that is less a drill than an argument with gravity. Boats smacked the water. One bowline parted. A raft went off like a slapped lid and tumbled men into spindrift. The escorts, destroyers, and corvettes threw themselves between the dying freighters and the U-boat's firing track. Depth charges thumped the sea and rose as dull blooms. A Canadian corvette, HMCS Nanaimo, worked in close and hauled cold, oil-streaked survivors over the side in batches, counting heads that did not add to the full number they expected. When the sun lifted, the convoy had clawed ahead, and the submarine was gone. The Port Nicholson, stern deep, bow cocked toward the wind, stubbornly refused to sink. At first light, a plan formed the way plans do when pieces of luck stack up. A merchantman not yet gone, an escort with lines and men to spare, a patch of weather threatening but workable. A cutter from Nanaimo put off with 8 aboard, Captain Jeffrey, his chief officer Philip Munday, a Royal Navy lieutenant temporarily attached to the corvette, and 5 ratings, to see if they could get a tow on the freighter and bring her into shoaler water. They made the ladder on the freighter's quarter and climbed into a tilted world that smelled of wet cordage and hot metal cooling. On deck, everything was moved 6 degrees off normal. They signal-lamped back that the situation looked manageable. Then, without warning, the stern took a deeper bite. The ship went from wounded to dying in seconds. The cutter could not get clear. When the Port Nicholson plunged, she dragged the small boat under with her. Men in the corvette saw 3 clinging to a raft and 1 swimming. They got 2 ratings back, alive. The captain, the chief officer, the lieutenant, and 2 others were gone. 6 in all would be counted as lost of the 91 aboard. By mid-morning, the sea had closed over the last bits of wreckage that could be seen with the naked eye. The convoy steamed on. Nanaimo landed the survivors at Boston. The coordinates went into wartime files with the bare facts a Navy needs: date, time, enemy, torpedoes observed, ships hit, probable sinkings, rough position. The depth there is about 700 feet, deep enough to discourage any casual grab at the hull, shallow enough to be reachable when peacetime made it legal to try. For the families, the official letters arrived with the phrasing of that era: regret, bravery, the circumstances of war, folded around the names of men now in the sea. The Port Nicholson herself was not unusual. Built on the Tyne in 1918 for the Port Line, she was a refrigerated cargo ship of about 8,400 gross tons, steel, twin-screw, 4 steam turbines geared to make about 14 knots on a good day, with more than 328,000 cubic feet of chilled space for meat and dairy. She had carried ordinary cargoes along long tracks for 2 decades, produce, stores, parts, and in 1942 she was in that business again, scheduled for New York and then the Panama Canal and beyond. Her manifest listed automobile parts and military stores. She had a master with years under him and enough crew to keep the watch bill filled. She also had the bad luck to be where a trained captain in a U-boat found her in a storm that made escorts guess rather than see. For decades, the wreck was a line on charts and a memory in households. The ocean off New England is thick with steel from the war years, and more than one story ended in those waters with a ship hit in the dark. Then, in 2012, a Maine-based salvor named Greg Brooks announced he had found the Port Nicholson. He said he had more than a hulk. He had a story inside it. According to him, buried under silt and collapsed steel lay about 71 tons of platinum bars, maybe with gold and industrial diamonds, payment from the Soviet Union to the United States under Lend-Lease, lost when the ship went down. At modern prices, it was billions. Footage from his remotely operated vehicles showed a freighter at the right location and depth. Investors put in millions. Crews went out season after season aboard the salvage vessel, Sea Hunter. A TV audience saw boxes on screen and imagined ingots inside. The rumor had a logic that made it sticky. In 1942, the United States sent weapons and materiel to the USSR on credit terms that were being negotiated while the fighting went on. If a valuable cargo had crossed the Atlantic as part of settling accounts, it could have moved quietly under wraps. There were even hints, heavily redacted archival pages waved at cameras, that someone had tallied platinum in ounces with 7 figures and a line that looked like a ship name. But logic, hints, and edits are not proof. The British, the Americans, and the Russians all had reasons to question the story or claim a share if it turned out to be true. Maritime historians pointed out gaps in the paperwork and the habit, among certain salvors, of making claims grow in public faster than the crates could be opened underwater. By late 2013, the tide had turned on the dock as well as in court. Investors sued Brooks, alleging fraud and misrepresentation, and said the platinum was a mirage used to raise money that never produced a bar. The salvor put his ship up for sale and laid off most of his crew. Federal authorities looked at the fundraising pitch and the results and asked their own questions. In 2015, a federal judge dismissed Brooks's salvage claims to the Port Nicholson with prejudice and ordered him to return a handful of artifacts he had already taken. The billion-dollar cargo, if it ever existed, remained exactly where it had been in the public mind for 70-plus years, in a rumor that could not be made solid. Under all that noise sits a wartime wreck with a simple, hard record. A freighter in a coastal convoy was hit twice before coffee. Most of her people lived because escorts did their jobs in ugly weather. A handful died because they went back. Competent men trying something that might have worked in a different sea, and the ship took them with her when she finally let go. She lies roughly 30 nautical miles east of Provincetown in about 700 feet of cold Atlantic, the hull broken, the holds full of silt. If you dropped to her with modern lights, you would see the angles and apertures by which water unbuilt her, and you might find the broken path the boarding party took from the quarter, and you would see nothing at all of the families who waited for letters that June and the corvette that shouldered into the wind to bring home the rest. Treasure stories attach themselves to wrecks because the ships cannot argue back. This one has details plenty strong enough without bullion. Port Nicholson was 481 feet long, with 2 screws and brine-cooled holds, built on a river in the northeast of England, and put to work in a world that would soon require every merchantman to be a piece in a fighting machine. On her last morning, she held together just long enough to raise hope, and that hope killed men as surely as German torpedoes. Everything else, platinum, diamonds, litigation, is a later layer, like silt blown into a corner, heavy until it is disturbed, then cloudy, then resettled until someone else comes along to stir it. If you stand on the breakwater at Provincetown and look east on a windy morning, the line where sky meets water shows nothing of what lies there. Airliners pass high above the spot. Fishing boats drag nets a mile away. Weather buoys buckle and right themselves. Currents go about their business. Far below, the steel that kept food cold and cargo moving lies with a hole where a torpedo's wake ended. The boarding ladder is still in the wrong place for a level sea. The story returns in cycles. When a diver claims a find, when a court issues an order, when an anniversary pushes the names back into print. The facts that don't shift sit in the middle. A night attack, a delayed sinking, a failed tow, 6 dead, and the rest picked off a heaving gray surface by a corvette crew who did not stop looking until they had to clear the area for the convoy. On paper, Port Nicholson's final entries add up with no romance. Convoy code, escort list, time of attack, depth of water, ships struck, lives lost, survivors landed. In the water, what remains is a freighter on the seafloor, and the difficult truth that a handful of men went back aboard because that is what seamen will always try to do when a ship is still there to be saved. The treasure can stay a rumor. The wreck is a certainty. And certainty, in a story told often and loudly, is the only thing that still feels like a find. Thank you for listening to The Sunken Ledger. Subscribe for more true stories from the depths.